This is great. I love talking to you. It's fantastic.
I love talking with you as well because I don't meet so many people that I can learn from stuff significantly every conversation. Like there's
Oh,
value to that. It's it's great because you get me thinking in ways that I sorely miss. I haven't had experiences like that in a very long time. So
well, it's funny because to me, I feel like when it comes to entertainment, we're losing the people that, I mean, while the Writers Guild is on strike, we're losing the great writers and directors because I feel the next generation of writers that are coming up are not doing their due diligence. You know, they're not as educated as they should be. Like you said, they're watching Buffy and Galactica and that's it. You know, they're not delving into the past. They're not, like, if you asked somebody like Patty, who Patty Chayefsky was,
mhm.
or you asked somebody, you know, even David Mamet, you know, if you know David Mamet, the writer, and people are like, well, why, you know, he wrote
He
The
did the verdict.
Untouchables.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote The Verdict, and then he became a director. But did you know he came out of theater? Did you know that he did this? And I feel like nobody knows anything anymore, and they're missing out on foundational. You know, I love The Verdict. It's not for everybody, but and nowadays those kinds of stories, I mean, The Verdict is 41 years old, but those kinds of stories have become so par for the course now. There's been so many legal thrillers and dramas, and the turn of the plot in The Verdict is very familiar these days.
Yes.
But at the time it wasn't. And when James Mason is revealed and Charlotte Rampling is revealed to be a traitor, you know, and has wormed his way into her, it wormed her way into his confidence. And when I mean, it kills me every time I watch that movie. It kills me. There's this, you're listening to James Mason monologue and the camera's pulling back and you don't know who he's talking to.
Yep.
And then when Charlotte Rampling is revealed, I'm like, oh, every time I'm like, oh man.
And the thing is that she was in there from she was involved in that part before Paul Newman's character realized that he got the case. Like she was planted there like the same day.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like how deep were these guys in on what was on the operations going on in order to like no, okay, this is the type of woman he likes. We're gonna put her in this bar here that we know he frequents, and we found out he's reminded of this case today. So it's I mean it's great. I mean the other part too, and me and my geek friends say that the judge is clearly an ancestor of Duran Duran. You know, like you just
Oh,
can't not
he
ignore.
looks well. It might be Miles O'Shea.
Yeah,
Is it? It's the same
it is the
actor.
same actor. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's the same. It's Miles O'Shea. Yeah. So that's so funny. But you know, it's such a great, and Lindsay Krause, who's the nun that is these men, you know, and she was married to David Mamet, you know, and she was a great theater actor because they came out of the Chicago theater together. And it's just, you just don't see movies like that anymore. And those are the movies when I was a kid. I mean, I was in junior high school when that movie came out, and it totally affected me.
Well,
They're like, just
there's part of the point there. Nobody cares, and curiosity appears to be some sort of lost trait among at least my peer group, sadly, and those younger than me.
it's really weird. I mean, I wanted to know, and everybody that I know, that a lot of us moved to LA and became these geeks that are all working in the film business. We had an insatiable appetite to learn. Like we were always going to revival houses, and if somebody was speaking, we'd go listen to them talk. I mean, that was the great thing about living, especially in the 90s. You had access to everybody. People would come and speak, and then if you wanted to go meet with them later, you could. I mean, it was great. It was great because and because it was always the same people, and the filmmakers could recognize, oh, you were at this thing or you were at that thing, and I met you here, I met you. So
Yeah.
it was always the same people. It wasn't, you couldn't even get film students nowadays to go to a lot of these things. They don't care.
No, they're very self-involved with their own art. And you know the other part too. One of the things I think is the biggest downfall of some of the film schools, at least nowadays, is everyone when you start out at the very beginning, you kind of want to break the rule to make your mark and show people that you accomplished something that even the best couldn't do. But you always fail at that, and you're supposed to fail at that because you're supposed to learn the hard lesson that there's a reason it's done this way. And if you want to break that rule, you've got to learn everything about the industry and how to do these stories, how to direct, how to edit, how to convey your act, how to convince your actors, how to appease them. I mean, it took me 3 years to figure out, as long as you talk to an actor about themselves, you'll probably get them to agree to anything you want them to do. and
Yeah.
it works out well, but it takes time to learn that. But now we don't seem to have any of the curiosity. I don't see many teachers getting super excited about classical works. I remember it was 2009, I think it was, when and the only reason I didn't know about this prior is because the reruns of it weren't ever broadcast in my area growing up, but I discovered the Wild Wild West television show from the
Oh
60s.
yeah.
And I loved it because it was really, really clever and funny. And it had a little bit of that William Dozier Batman stuff. And
Yep.
there's some cross staffing between writers and the production. And it's like, I understand why, they wanted to turn this into a movie back then. But they also, sadly, at the same time, they didn't quite get what the show was and tried to make it big for the film. And speaking of other television shows, one thing that I did watch as a kid, because it aired right before Star Trek in my neighborhood, was Mission Impossible. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation with you today, sir. Because Mission Impossible, a lot of people, I would assume, might think that Mission Impossible was not a huge hit show when it broadcast as a franchise. And I'm thinking, let's take a look at the history of it a little bit, shall we?
Oh no, I mean Mission Impossible is monstrously huge, and the actors. I mean, you had both John Koenig, played by, one of the great actors of our time, who won an Academy Award playing Bela Lugosi in Tim Burton's Ed Wood.
Yeah, Martin Landau was
Martin Landau, who was also he also worked for Hitchcock in North by Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife, Barbara Bain. He met his wife, Barbara Bain, who also went on to space in 1999. Leonard Nimoy was on Mission Impossible.
You have Greg Morris, like Nichelle Nichols, was a black man in a television show that was not a criminal and was not a servant to somebody else. He was he was an engineer and carpenter and electrical genius. And he knew mime really well, because a lot of the stuff he did in those episodes were silent scenes where all he had to do was his actions, and he had to convey so much, and he sold it every time. And I think he's the only actor who's credited on all episodes, even though I don't think he was in every episode.
And again, and it was never a thing that he was black. Usually, he was just an actor, a great actor that they added to the cast, and that as a kid, those episodes were so much fun to watch. I mean, it was one of the great. It didn't have the impact on me that Star Trek or the Twilight Zone had, but it was still, whenever it was on, you had to watch it, because
it was so different. Because the whole premise of the show is these guys have to pull off a mission where the people that they're pulling it off of have no idea that they did it, and the suspense is, will they get caught, and what goes wrong,
and if they do get caught, they're going to be disavowed.
Yes.
No knowledge. This tape is going to self-destruct. If anyone, no knowledge of this, you're on your own. And that idea was so compelling. You especially as a kid, it really captured your imagination, and you're like, what's going to happen this week? And the thing is, they pulled off these great capers every week. And that was the joy of it. Like, you never knew what was going to happen. You never knew how it was going to happen. And the whole thrill of it was to see, how are these people going to pull off whatever they needed to pull off every week? And they would do it as a team.
Yeah. Each one had their own specific set of skills. They complement each other. In college, me and my friends had a drinking game of when are we going to see the Martin Landau play another character that he has to take over the identity of in order to make it convincing.
Yeah.
Which we loved those moments. They were brilliant.
They were brilliant, and it ran 7 seasons, like Next Generation ended up running. Right?
It was 7 seasons. Another Desilu production. It ran 7 seasons, which was pretty amazing at that time, because then back in the day, not a whole lot of series managed to get that long unless they were really, really good. And as I was telling you earlier before the recording, when I was researching this, the reason CBS decided to cancel the show is that they thought they could make more money in syndication as opposed to syndication and making new episodes. So they just, instead of doing both to make more episodes to run for syndication longer, they're like, oh, we can just forget the episodes and just rerun it over and over again. And it ended up being in declining. And another fascinating aspect I found that parallels with Star Trek, especially The Next Generation, is that the 1988 revival, much like in the first season of Next Gen, where Tasha Yar is killed off as a character, in the 88 season, they have one of the members of the IMF team killed off almost for similar reasons, where the actor felt like she wasn't getting enough value out of the character for what she was doing. I'm like, it's fascinating. You have these two properties from the same, original studio, Desilu, purchased by Paramount, running on parallels with revivals in the 80s. Yeah. And one had a film franchise that started in late 70s and went through the 80s. And the other one now has a franchise that comes into the mid 90s. That is also a vehicle for Tom Cruise. And one of the
96, the first Mission Impossible came out in 96.
Came out in 96.
By the way, I want to point out in the 88 revival, that character who died, who was killed in the first season, was the first on-screen character that was disavowed.
Yes.
They disavowed any knowledge from knowing who she was. We'd never seen that before in the 60s version of the show.
Exactly, because again, there was lots of consequences, lots of screw-ups that happened in various missions here and there that would make it like, touch and go, but they never pulled the trigger to say, okay, we're going to actually kill off this character. But they never really did anything like that with Star Trek. Granted, it was a principal cast of 3, so like you don't really want to kill 1/3 of your principal cast off.
Yeah,
in a series of that type. But with the 80s, you have Mission Impossible, and it was definitely big enough for Paramount to want to make a movie out of it, because they basically had a successful model with Star Trek. They're like, okay, we can actually do this. We can take our television shows that we have, and we can do a theatrical run that will make a lot of money, keep it under minimal budget, which for Mission Impossible they did, because Tom Cruise had just started getting his bigger paydays, and he foregoed that for gross points on the back end, so that made the budget around like $60 to $80 million of memory serves.
Well, he wanted him and at the time his producing partner, who was his former agent, Paula Wagner. They had their company, so it was a movie that Tom Cruise wanted to produce because he had loved the series as a kid.
Oh yeah, he was a huge fan of the series as a kid, and that makes me ask this one question, because one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on there for your insightfulness, in addition to, is the fact that we've had a couple of big franchises, arguably bigger than Mission Impossible, where mentor characters or the original people that founded the franchise that made it lucrative are kind of rewritten in a way where they're passing the torch, but at the expense of them still being heroes. And right. We actually have a model of this where it apparently is successful, and that is with Mission Impossible. And in the mid 90s, Mission Impossible was still kind of in the conversation. The music was often used in parodies and lots of references. Again, it was only 8 years out of the revival of the series, which the first season did great, so great that ABC, who was the distributor for it, thought that they could actually beat The Cosby Show.
Yeah. I mean, that was a mistake.
It was definitely a mistake, but I mean, for them to get enough data to think that could work, because they aired it on Saturdays and it did banger on the numbers. And they said, well, if this is doing so well on Saturdays, maybe we can put it up against Cosby and really stick it to them. And it didn't work. And unfortunately, as a result, they put it back to Saturdays. People didn't turn up in the quantity anymore because they got confused. They're like, well, I guess it was canceled when they moved it from Saturday to Cosby, because they didn't pay attention, and not everybody watches or reads the TV guide or whatever. And you end up losing your audience to support the show, and unfortunately it gets canceled. And I think two reasons. One, if they actually went through the syndication model like they did with Star Trek, I don't think the show would have been canceled. Probably would have gone maybe another 7 seasons. Given the fact that even only a handful of the episodes of the first season were remakes of the original series, and then a whole bunch afterwards were all original episodes, very engaging, a lot of fun. Even Peter Graves coming back as Jim Phelps, people adored his return.
And Greg Morris's son, right?
Greg Morris's son, who
looked just like him.
I think he also was on Seinfeld as the lawyer a couple of times too. Very versatile actor. A lot of fun.
Great actor. It was just cool that and again, they took the time.
Mhm.
They cared about that continuity and creating that kind of lineage. And but what was really, I think, what you had asked me about how, and it was controversial in the movie, John Voight comes back and plays Jim Phelps.
Yes.
And I literally just watched the movie again in my prep for Dead Reckoning. I got the new Steelbook discs, and I had forgotten as I was thinking about that, because you asked me about why did they get away with that. But I was thinking, in the cultural zeitgeist in the mid 90s, there was a couple of things that happened before Mission Impossible. One was the X-Files, and two, the James Bond movie GoldenEye that came out the year before Mission Impossible cast 006, who was in the opening of the movie. 006 and Bond are working together.
Mm-hmm.
And then 006 double crosses him and he becomes evil, and he's going to destroy London using the GoldenEye weapon. And in the X-Files, it showed that the government agencies were all part of this vast conspiracy, and so, and I didn't look back and see what was going on culturally, but there was definitely something about these government institutions, these venerable institutions that used to be full of heroes. Like it was, I remember in GoldenEye, I'm like, wait, a double O goes rogue, turns bad? Like, who do that? And then when I saw Mission Impossible, I just watched a video where Tom Cruise tells a story about he was having dinner at Steven Spielberg's house, and he was now producing Mission Impossible, and they were looking for a director. And Brian De Palma was at this dinner because Tom Cruise lived down the street from Spielberg at the time. And the way he talks about it is that he was really impressed with Brian De Palma at this dinner. So he went back and he watched all of De Palma's movies. He doesn't talk about Phantom of the Paradise or Hi Mom or Carrie, but he did talk about like the Untouchables, and I'm sure he watched Untouchables or Casualties of War or Blowout, and Dress to Kill and Obsession and all De Palma's great movies. But it was Tom Cruise who made that decision to bring on board Brian De Palma to direct. And if you look at that Mission Impossible movie, the screenwriters are, first of all, you have David Koepp and Steve Zalian who wrote the story. They have the story credited, and then the final screenplay is credited to Robert Towne and David Koepp. Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown.
Yep.
I mean, the pedigree, having Steve Zalian, David Koepp. I mean, David Koepp has never been, in my mind, the quality of a writer that, say, a Robert Towne or a Steve Zalian is, but he was getting a lot of work in the 90s, especially.
Yes.
So I wouldn't diss on David Koepp. He was a great working screenwriter. But the pedigree of those three writers writing Mission Impossible, you couldn't have had a better writing staff. I mean, in terms of taking your TV show and giving it a Tiffany treatment, with Tom Cruise starring, John Voight playing Phelps, and this writing staff and De Palma directing, that's A-list all the way. They were not skimping at all on anything.
They weren't, because I've read the November 94 David Koepp script. Is actually you can see my review of it on my Patreon, and it's beautifully structured. The set pieces are well organized, and a lot of the dialogue actually pretty much stays the same. And what I think happens is, like, Steve Zalian and Robert Towne probably just cut some of the extraneous set pieces that weren't in there, because there's a cathedral set piece where Phelps is on a motorcycle and saves Ethan. And then there's a jailbreak set piece. And it's like, well, these kind of chew up time that they don't need to waste. So it's like, okay, we'll cut those, and the exposition that we get from those two scenes, we'll just rework them into other scenes to make it all work. And you can tell that they only really made, at least from my records that I have here, there's only really 3 drafts of this script. There's the first draft that David Koepp did, the polish that Koepp did with Zillion, and then there's the shooting script, which Robert Towne, I believe, got in there with Brian De Palma, and they just tightened it up as they were shooting. But one of the things here is that this is a movie that was very successful at the box office. Even like rereading some of the old trades, there was already talks of a sequel months after it had left theaters, and it took 4 years for them to get a sequel made, which was kind of
it was. There's what I'm reading now, $80 million spend, and it grossed $457.7 million worldwide, making it the 3rd highest grossing film of '96 on an $80 million budget. Of $457 million worldwide gross is very, very, very respectable.
Yes.
That's a very
And
profitable movie, especially during that time. I mean, the fact that when Terminator 2 came out in what 91, that was the first $100 million film. But even with the Tom Cruise movie, a movie that costs less than $100 million, I'll tell you something, this movie looks lush.
yes.
It really is a beautiful looking movie. It's brilliantly photographed. I mean, Stephen Burham is one of the great talented cinematographers, especially in terms of big budget studio movies of the 90s. I mean, this was A-list all the way. Danny Elfman did the score, and then Larry Mullen and Jr. and Adam Clayton from U2 did the dance version of the Lalo Schifrin, the very famous soundtrack music. So, I mean, this thing had so many great talents behind it. Um, what
Oh,
what what a production this was.
I mean, it was a brilliant production, but it also, I mean, you also get in, you got Jean Reno from Leon the Professional and a bunch of other
As a villain.
as a villain. You get Ving Rhames, who in the original draft, there is a guy named Mitnick who is the computer hacker, and then Luther was the guy that would procure all the gear and equipment that was needed. And they decided to combine them into one character, and also remove the treacherous aspect of Luther and make him a hero. And what was brilliant about that, because this is one of the things I tell a lot of up and coming writers, is like, if you can have one character do these multiple facets, let them do that. Don't make one character for one job specifically, because you then kind of, one, you expand the budget with the cast, and two, you force the actor to do a lot more work to try and make this character three-dimensional and fleshed out, when you could just take those other aspects of those other characters, combine them in there, make it easier for the actor to really deliver a knockout performance.
Yeah, 100%.
I thought what was really clever is how they managed to balance that out, is the scene inside the train car where we're meeting Jean Reno and Ving Rhames for the first time. And what's absolutely fantastic is that you get from the performance of Jean Reno that he knows Claire. And,
Right.
like, you already get the fact that he knows Claire. And Tom Cruise's character Ethan reinforces that, because when Jean Reno says that he might have difficulties, Tom is like saying, "Well, that's not what Claire tells me about you. She says you could do this, blah 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 blah." And then what's interesting is that we learn that Ving Rhames doesn't know any of these three people. Like, and the only way that he knows Ethan is because Ethan reached out to him, and Ethan doesn't even really know him. And it sets up a very, very fun dynamic with that scene. Tells you everything you need to know about the relationships going on here.
100%. And that's another thing about this script, is how smart it is.
Oh,
For that, I mean, it's a really smart script. It's really intriguing, and it's funny because people forget that Tom Cruise had a lot. He had a lot of heavy lifting to do in this movie. He couldn't just rely on his smile, or he couldn't be like Cole Trickle in Days of Thunder. He couldn't be like Pete Maverick in Top Gun. I mean, this was pre Jerry Maguire, a year before Jerry Maguire came out. So, or was it the same year? I think it was
very
previous.
close, at least.
It was very close, but we hadn't seen Jerry Maguire yet, I don't think. And he had to be. You go back and you watch it now, he's like a baby. He's a baby.
He's 30, I think. There, yeah,
yeah, but he's got the crew cut, so he looks cool, and he's able to. You see him. This is the first time you really see him as an action hero, and he's got a great physicality to him. The way he moves, the way he looks, the intensity of his face, and it was a really this movie could have gone south. It might not have worked, but I think it really works like gangbusters. And watching it again, I literally watched it 2 days ago. It still holds up. As a matter of fact, you forget because now we're so used to these big set pieces, but you forget that this was really a movie about cloak and dagger.
yes.
It's got great set pieces, like in that room where he rappels down, and lands flat, and it's
all to download a file. Like, it's the most elaborate way to download a file, and you buy into it because of not the sense of information, but also the level of security that they have to work around to make this thing work. I mean, it has its hiccups here and there. And for instance,
Yes.
It comes down to, all right, so we have a model where an established hero from the series, and this is supposed to be in continuity with the television series, mind you, because they did ask Peter Graves to come back, and when he found out what they were going to do, he said no.
Right.
And I don't blame him for that. But this is a series where Jim Phelps is setting up Ethan to take the fall for him basically being a traitor, but we don't understand exactly why he's a traitor. Like when there's that monologue he gives where he's speculating why Kittredge would be the traitor. And how great of a casting for Henry Czerny for Kittredge. What a brilliant choice. That he has the perfect voice for doing the IMF dossiers, and really, really kind of like forced Tom Cruise to sort of give his A game when they're doing their scenes back and forth.
Again, Henry Czerny, something in the zeitgeist. He was in Clear and Present Danger, as he was very close to the president. And I love Henry Czerny so much. And I remember in Clear and Present Danger, when he's saying to Jack Ryan, he's saying to Harrison Ford, I have a pardon from the president. You don't have one of those pieces of paper, do you, Jack? It's just his line delivery. I mean, and the fact that we haven't seen him in the franchise again, we haven't seen him again until Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I'm like, when I saw Henry Czerny in the trailer, I'm like, yes.
Me too.
I'm so excited.
He played it very well. But like we have this model where he's saying, okay, so Jim Phelps is saying Kittredge is like, oh, well, he's disenfranchised with the government. The president no longer answers to us. We answer to him. How dare he? And it's like, it feels so slapdash, like last minute, like we don't know why Jim Phelps is betraying this or doing any of this stuff. In the first draft, there was a love triangle between Tom Cruise and Emmanuel Barrett's character, where there's a set piece where they're basically getting a Russian general executed by his own men because he's having an affair with a woman who I guess, suspect he's giving secrets to. And they're like, well, we're going to kill you. And apparently it's established in the script that Ethan and Claire have been on missions as pairs for quite a while, to the point where they got an attraction to each other, but they've never consummated because Claire is married to Jim, and Ethan is actually very religious and he doesn't believe in violating the sanctity of marriage. And that is completely tossed out. And what we end up having here is, in the script, is basically implied that the reason Phelps is doing this is because he recruited Ethan, and now he's going after his wife. And he's like, well, screw this. Not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to frame you for selling a knock list, the non-official coverts list. And I'm going to take the money with my wife and we're going to live somewhere else. And that was the story. It was kind of like a little femme fatale type of thing, except she's not orchestrating it. She's not manipulating Jim Phelps, which when I first saw this movie as like a 12-year-old, and I had already seen, The Big Sleep and a bunch of Double Indemnity and all those old classic film noir stipes with the femme fatale character that's manipulating him. I'm thinking halfway through this film, well, Claire's clearly the one. She killed her husband and she's doing this all, and she's going to kill Ethan. And then they turn it around. It's like, wait, Jim Phelps is alive? Like, whoa, I was not expecting that.
Well, and he even says, I mean, in the movie, he flat out says that they had slept together, and he makes a comment. He goes, I've tasted the fruit of that vine or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, what?
Well, he thinks they have, but we don't know for sure, because even that one scene where she like reaches out to him, it's like he's already learned what has happened at this point. He's already learned that, the Drake Hotel Chicago, the Gideon stamped the Bible, and that's another part too. Is like, where did Jim Phelps get this idea of the Bible? Because that would, if we knew that, say, Ethan was a devout Catholic and that was his means to frame him, that would then make sense. But again, that part is kind of completely abandoned in the final product. So it's kind of weird. It's a great cover. Like, we have this character named Job who should be very loyal to IMF. If he's like, it's the irony is in there. Like, the world should be crapping on him, but he's still loyal to IMF, and that's why he keeps doing it. That would make sense with regards to Job, but they actually do the inverse. They basically make Job the guy who's like, yeah, I'm going to side with the devil and I'm going to turn them over. And it's very clever stuff. And I think it's quite interesting how it's the characters. It's the fact that the relationship to this is it's not so much that, that the character of Jim Phelps is betrayed. I mean, I think he is objectively with regards to who he was in the series and what he's meant to the show.
And by the way, people who are fans were not happy Like
No,
when
they
this
weren't.
movie came out, there's a lot of people that were really, dare I say, angry about making Jim Phelps the villain. But I think that there was something in the mid 90s. There was definitely something going on in the popular zeitgeist about the distrust of government and this feeling. Because like I said earlier, the X-Files and the fact that in the last Bond film, a double O goes bad, goes rogue. And it was always the same, that the message cited, or the reason cited, was like, I work and I'm not getting what I deserve.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these villains had the commonality. In the X-Files, it was different. They were trying to save themselves from extinction when the alien invasion happens. But the 006, he wasn't not happy with the way he was treated by the government. And the idea that our servants, our first line of defense, are not paid what they're worth, are not valued, is something I think that is still a problem 25 years later, or 28 years later, whatever, in our society, is still the case today. We have these government operatives, we have our police, our first responders, especially post 9/11. We expect these people to be on post for us all the time, ready to save our asses when the stuff goes down. And yet they're some of the most least respected, least paid, least taken care of. It's like, oh yes, let's not give the 9/11 first responders what they are due, because why should we have to pay them, even though as a result of them being first on the ground, they had to deal with cancer issues and what they were inhaling when the Twin Towers fell. We still have, even now, there's still, you have people fighting, like Jon Stewart, fighting for 9/11 first responders to get the care they need, because we're, especially America, we do not do well taking care of our public servants. We're first to give platitudes. Thank you for your service. Well, that's fine. That it cannot buy me a cup of coffee. Show me the money.
Yeah. And it basically just shows the mentality of those authority figures viewing them as disposable as opposed to, important. It's like, yes, we understand you're putting your life on the line. Here's some compensation, not for you essentially, but for your family in the event that you might not make it back. I think that's not unreasonable. Like, that's the thing. And what's funny,
no,
what's fair with regards to your point with especially 006, who not only did he feel betrayed by the government, but he was willing to betray Bond from the get-go there
right,
for a life, for money, because he wanted more than what MI6 was going to offer him. He wanted, like, he wanted to maybe take home the winnings that he got gambling at Baccarat or something of that nature, but he can't. He had to return that over to the British government. And maybe he wanted to be in the newspapers. Yes, I saved this town from a nuclear explosion from a terrorist, and I want to get accolades, and I want to have a ticker tape parade and all those things, but you can't, because you sign up for this to be secret and covert, and it's done so that the public doesn't fall into a panic knowing that these things are happening while they're trying to go to bed.
And I, to be honest, I like that. I like this as a motivation for a character. I mean, at the time, because we weren't very far away from the revival where Jim Phelps came back of the TV series, and I understand people who grew up with it objected to making that character a bad guy. However, at the time it was made, and even now, we look at this scrutiny that our public servants are under, and we expect them to. Like, if you're trying to take down bad guys, drug cartel lords who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and you get a drug bust, and you want to pocket $5,000 from the drug bust, for help your family. Like, those people, if they're caught, will be trussed up and burned at the stake in our courts of law as cops gone bad, cops gone rogue, and it's like, the idea that we expect public servants to be basically angels, to be squeaky clean, and yet they're not compensated fairly, not for the amount of faith we put in them. I think that the message that, is it bad that Jim Phelps finally grows up and goes bad? Is that a bad message? Yes. However, especially I think now, if the Mission Impossible franchise was starting today, I think people would understand Phelps's motivation, and we'd be listening to all kinds of YouTube pundits going, he did have a point.
Yeah.
But back then it was like, what? It was the fact that he allowed people to die. he allowed agents in his employ to die, and he wanted to sell out his best agent, Ethan Hunt, to take the fall for him. So he becomes a really bad guy.
Yes.
So, because they didn't want any ambiguity there. It's
No,
like,
no, they
no, we
didn't.
have to make him so bad. He can't just take the money. He has to take the money and kill his allies. So we know he's evil.
Yeah. And it's like, well, so does that work because of the context that he's possibly not feeling rewarded for what he has? I mean, listen, he managed to recruit and marry a really hot woman.
I know.
Like, I think that's pretty. And
Extremely hot.
now he's in a household with a double income from the same company. And like, I mean, that's pretty. I don't know. I think that would probably make him reassess his ability to say, you know what, I'm probably going to stick around for a little bit more. We have a 2 income household now, and we get to
Yeah,
travel
I
the
mean,
world.
I think it probably in the movie I don't think it's established very well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't I mean it seems more like a third act twist that they came up with late in the game, probably because of as a result of thinking about GoldenEye or thinking about X-Files and how government agents, now these people were corruptible.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to see. I mean, one of the things I've always loved about pop movies, popular cinema, movies as opposed to film or cinema, but movies is they really reflect the time in which they're made. And there was clearly, now I want to go back, and I didn't do the research to figure out like what was going on politically, what was going on in the zeitgeist to make this choice, this like. And nowadays I wonder, would a studio allow, like, if you had Tom Cruise in a Mission Impossible movie now,
Mm-hmm.
and you said, okay, Ethan, you're the villain in this one, we're going to reveal that you're the villain the same way that Phelps was the villain in Mission Impossible 1, he would never go for that. He would never go for that because
No,
Ethan Hunt is sacrosanct. He is a man of God. He is the last angel on earth.
which
And him
was
and
the
his team.
same. Yeah, him and his team, which was the same argument that Peter Graves and Martin Landau made. Is like, you can't do that to these people. And the question being is like, would, because again, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that were very upset with Jim Phelps being revealed as the villain.
There was.
And I don't begrudge them, because it's like, it is a betrayal. It's kind of like one of the first big ones of a pop culture series where they take the character and they make him a bad guy, or they make him pathetic, or they don't make him live up to the standards with which he established. And
Yeah.
the question being is like, well, do they have to make it Jim Phelps? Because we know from the Mission Impossible series there are other teams. Like, why couldn't it just be a brand new original team with none of the original characters, and we have this one guy, and maybe you have Jim Phelps make a cameo and he's like, hey, Ethan, you're doing good, you want to come on my team for the next movie or something, like at the end, right? Like, to bring him back into the organization, because he wanted out at the end of the film. He felt disillusioned by this for the same reasons that Phelps did, because they were so quick to accuse him as being a mole and go after him, and not even do their due diligence to find out, the source of the problem, which was that who is Max? Why did they want the knock list? Why did Joe breed out to them? All those types of things. I thought it was kind of interesting. So does this model work because either A, Mission Impossible is not as big of a franchise, at least at the period of 90s, for what it was, or does it work because leading up to that, before there's that twist, we are still led to believe that Jim Phelps is a good mentor, has a great relationship with Ethan, and the rest of his team, the way he organizes everything and the way he kind of like sets up that briefing, and how he's still going out on recruitments to get more agents into the impossible mission force. And even when they have that dialogue at the airport, where he's like, I looked up your aliases, and I knew you were in London. He's like, I knew you had an affinity for the hotels in this area. He's like, yeah, because I showed them to you, and we bonded. Like, you get a camaraderie here. And then you get that extra little bit where he puts it together and realizes, oh my God, this person who was like a second father to me killed our friends and colleagues.
Well, I mean, I think you nailed it in the sense that the reason it works in this movie is because you have Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Once you have like Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt's a new character, and the fact they have to have you. I don't see if you're making a Mission Impossible movie, you had to have Jim Phelps in it.
In some capacity, absolutely, yes.
And if you're having Jim Phelps and a new character played by Tom Cruise, both of them can't be angels of their better nature, and Jim Phelps was, Jim Phelps was the leader, and Jim Phelps was basically the heart and soul of Mission Impossible. But if he's going to be in the movie, you can't have that because Ethan Hunt has to be that.
Well, yeah. Well, this is the passing of the torch, and
Yeah,
you could have the one model, which is like the Obi-Wan Kenobi model, which it looks like what the movie had at the beginning, like the hero,
right.
the angel that taught the new angel has been killed on a bridge by someone that has betrayed them, that knew what was going on, and that's what's carrying you through this movie until he resurfaces again, and now you're like, well, what's the next?
I mean, I don't know if this is true, but Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown, has one of the great, not to spoil it, but one of the great reversals, or one of the great, like, oh my God, I'm your sister, I'm your mother. It's just it's one of the most effed up reveals, in cinema history. And I have to believe that Robert Towne came up with that idea. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. But when he's writing the script, he's like, yeah, you youngins, I have an idea. I can see. Let me take you back to the 1970s. Let me tell you what we did. And I mean, I wonder if this was. I would like to imagine that somewhere in the Paramount archives, or Paramount, the hallowed halls of Paramount, when the executives read this script, somebody was like, "Wait, what? This latest draft of the script has Phelps as the villain." Somebody was like, "You can't do that." and Tom Cruise says, "Oh yes, we can." Robert Towne, need I remind you, Robert Towne wrote the script, and oh, by the way, Chinatown's a Paramount picture too. So, or something like that. And I think in a way, for me, and watching it the other day, I thought it worked. I thought it really, like, it is still a shocking reveal. The way it's played out. Yeah, I think you've pointed out that the wife, I don't buy the wife thing as much. I'm like, come on, why'd she marry him?
Yeah, that's the part. Like, that's why I'm thinking it should be a femme fatale.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, because it seems odd, and especially it's a weird scene when Phelps reveals that he's alive again, and he does make a scene. It is insinuated. I mean, maybe they didn't, but that it's weird because he's like, "Oh, did you get a taste of that? I mean, she's my wife. I know." It's like, what are you treating her like she's not your wife anymore?
Yeah,
It's
like
even
you're a pimp to her.
Yeah, it gets a little weird. I have
does.
to say, it does. It gets a little weird in there, a little, and watching it again, it's a little murky.
Mm-hmm.
I do like the fact that it is revealed. He is revealed to be a villain, but that became a trope, like I was talking about, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things I'm not thinking about where the main character becomes a villain, and that was definitely carried through in the Jack Ryan movies, that all these people that work for the president, they're really, I mean, in Clear and Present Danger that Kittredge is in, as Henry Czerny, the president is revealed to be the guy pulling this. He's the bad guy, at the end. And so it became a thing. It became a trope that these people that were supposed to stand up for truth, justice, the American way, turned out to be the bad guys, and that became a thing for the next decade.
Yeah, and yet even though there is some pushback from it from some of the people, it was never to the level of what we're seeing kind of now. And the question is it really come down to the cast and the execution of it, or is the model faulty by its own nature, and it just takes a generation to really pick up on it and realize that it's not to the best interest of overall the story? Because that's the question that I raise.
Well, it's interesting, because I think in a way you're making a movie about a group of people, the IMF, the Impossible Missions Force, that is essentially, they're good. We from a movie perspective, we as the moviegoers, we want to believe that they're good.
Yes.
We want to believe that the Jedi are good. We want to believe that whatever group of people that are our heroes. And now, because there's so much betrayal in our real world, there's so many people who will sell out for money, which is really disappointing, because at the end of the day, what does money buy you? It buys you comfort and luxury. but it doesn't buy you peace of mind, and it doesn't necessarily buy you a soul, and it's unfortunate at the end of the day. I think that characters that have, if that's all they're selling out their friends, family, country, whatever for, is money, I think that doesn't entirely work, because it's a little disappointing.
Yeah.
It ultimately is a disappointment, because you'd rather, I mean, even if you have a great villain who has a great cause, like Thanos, he might have been misguided and crazy, but at least in a way he's like altruistic. I'm like, I want to save the universe from ruin, and my way of saving the universe is I'm just going to get rid of half the beings in the universe and leave the resources behind. And you're kind of like, all right, buddy, I understand that. I mean, that's bad. I don't want to see half the people I know disappear, so I'm going to fight you. But I get it. Okay. But if Captain America turned out to be the villain, when they made him a Hydra agent, the comics people went bananas. Well, that would have been bad.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have bought that. I would have gotten as angry as some people who got when Mr. Phelps turned out to be a bad guy. Because you if you're going to do that, the only way it really works is you have to make it believable. You have to, and I don't think it's always believable, because at the end of the day, if people were once good and they were fighting the good fight, to have them sell out for something as petty or as just commonplace as money. I mean, I have to say, ever since Die Hard, when it's revealed that Hans Gruber, his only desire is to steal $600 million worth of bearer bonds, and Bonnie Bedelia is like, what, you're just a common thief? And Alan Rickman's like, I am exceptional. I'm an exceptional thief, madame, or whatever he says. And even it's great, because you realize that you think he's been so calm and cool and collected with his talk of John Phillips London and his nice bespoke suits. You think there's something bigger on the agenda, like in Die Hard 2, when they're gonna try and spring a wronged dictator that the Americas used money, and then they turned on him in the end. But all he is a thief. He just wants to steal a bunch of money, and he's willing to kill a bunch of people to steal a lot of money. And it's like, oh, that's sad. So you want him to lose. But in the case of, but he was never a hero. He was always a villain. But even when he's a villain, because you like him as a villain, you really like that character of Hans Gruber. Yeah. And then when it's revealed that that's all it is, it's just about money. You don't want to stick it to the Nakatomi Corporation for exploiting the world. I mean, what?
Or whatever they're doing. I mean, the other part too, which it always makes me laugh when I think about heist films, is like, so we have these people that want to steal a lot of money. And it's like, well, why are you're stealing essentially the middleman. Like, if you're a thief and you're really good at stealing, just steal the stuff that you want to buy. Like, why waste the money? It's like, what you want to get taxes? It's like, no. I mean, you want to tell me a good heist film? Steal a house. Like, don't dig it up or anything, but like, just leave it on the block. Just steal it from somebody else and keep them out and get away with it. And that would be a very impressive heist, because it's like, you're not stealing money, you're stealing property. Property holds a lot of value. And if it's a mansion and it's a life of comfort, I mean, that's an impressive way to steal it. Like, you're not just stealing the deed and anything else. Like, you're just going right down to the nitty gritty. And if you steal somebody's house out from under them, where you get the whole world like evicts them from their home so that you can go in and walk, that's a pretty impressive heist, I would say, in my book. But stealing money, it's like you're basically saying, all right, well, you still want to buy stuff, but you're a thief. Thieves shouldn't care about buying things. like they should be like, I'm just going to steal it. If I want drugs, I'm just going to go to the dealer, I'm going to kill him and steal what he's got, and then I'm going to have a fun time.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the movies where like, one of my favorite movies of all time is Michael Mann's first theatrical feature, Thief, where James Caan is a jewel thief. He steals diamonds. That's all he steals. And that a lot of these, I love the movies where the thieves are, it's the act of stealing that's the buzz.
Yeah.
That's what they get off on. And you kind of feel that with Robert De Niro as well. Like, he takes down scores. He likes to take down scores. He likes to plan them. He likes to execute them. The money is great, but the money just represents that he was victorious in his desire to take down scores. It's artwork. It's art for him. It's his expression. And the same is true of like James Caan. He figures out ways to penetrate these impenetrable safes, and that's what gets him off. And then what does he use his money for? He bought a bar, and he bought a used car dealership, and thinks that, oh, he's putting his money into practical things that can pay for the rest of his life. He's not going to buy a yacht or something, and it always disappoints me when at the end of the day, and kind of in a way, Jim Phelps, that he wasn't his motivation was not for King and Country or the red, white, and blue. He just wanted money because he felt, and that to me, the trope is, oh, let's make a hero turn out to be the villain in the end.
Yeah.
And that's now it's so easy to me. That's now become a trope that is always disappointing, because I'm always thinking about, I wonder if the good guy's actually going to turn out to be the villain. It's been done so many times now. I don't know why when I went back and watched it again, even though obviously I knew it was coming, it still was fun to watch, because you got the whole train sequence and all that, and
that train sequence is fantastic, and it was really well done.
And it's really interesting, because obviously a lot of it, we complain now that everything's shot on the volume and shot on green screen. A lot of that train sequence is in fact visual effects.
Yes,
most of it is. However, the way it's shot and the fact that it's all the stylization of the whole movie, because it's De Palma and he stylizes it all, it totally works, because they have enough practical stuff going on in it, enough cutaways to real people on sets or against a green screen or whatever, that it all works. And you're watching it, it was still thrilling.
Yeah, their background plates were on point, because that's the other part too. With the volume, I don't know what it is, but anytime they're doing something where the background plates, like they're in a car or they're on a boat or something, the background plates don't feel like they're in sync with what's happening with the characters on the boat.
No.
And Tom Cruise had to get a skydiving training fan brought in to their set in order to get the wind to be so powerful that it would move his face, because that's the only way they were going to sell the fact that this was actually a composited effect, as opposed to them doing the actual stunt, which he would do years later, strapping himself to the side of a jet or a plane.
Yeah. And it works. Like, you see him being blown and then he flips over the top on the it's really good.
It's a really good set piece. Now, here's the premise that I would wonder. It's like, would this work better if Jim Phelps's reason wasn't for money, but he saw that IMF was actually abusing the techniques of himself and his team to further political agendas that were not constitutional?
You know what? I think that would be better, because I love villains who have a cause, misguided or guided. If they have a philosophy, it's always more interesting. And to me.
And on top of that, like, the conflict would be, well, he's following truth, justice, and the American way that we would all be on side of, and he's pushing against the government institutions that are actually breaking that. But his methods are what make him the bad guy, as opposed to his motives are actually very good. There's another way he probably could have done this, but the way that we end up having it is like, he kills his team and he frames, his star pupil, essentially,
right?
All for money. But when you take that dynamic of, like, he's trying to preserve the society with which he was sworn to protect, it does give you a completely different story, but it also puts you into a nice little twist factor where it's like, something that you wouldn't expect would be if Phelps brings that case to Ethan and Ethan realizes, oh my God, that's what's going on. And the hunt that's been happening on him is actually a part of that abuse. So yes, Kittredge is the bad guy. And Phelps faked his death in order to basically draw Kittredge out so we could actually get him.
Right.
That would have done everything that a lot of fans of Mission Impossible would absolutely love, because it's basically what's the premise of the Mission Impossible franchise as a show. Pulling off a mission without the people that are your targets realizing you pulled it off, and to do that against IMF of a corrupt agent would be huge. Like, I mean, it might not have made the $400 million worldwide, but it definitely would fit more in line. It wouldn't be a betrayal, but it'd also be at the same time a passing of the torch, where Phelps could be like, listen, we did this, we corrected it. Maybe he gets promoted to be the head who says, good morning, Mr. Hunt, on the tapes now. Right. And you've got that great passing of the torch without, disrespecting what that character was to the fans that would be your core audience that builds up your initial box office of sorts. Because that's one of the things, because after that first movie, the franchise no longer maintains that whole pulling off the mission without the people knowing it's happening.
Right.
It's now, okay, we're pretty much doing James Bond and Bourne Identity, but with better cinematography.
Yes, and it's true, and better stunt work. I mean,
Oh,
when I was
fantastic.
watching Fallout, I'm thinking this series has completely supplanted the Bond. And by the way, in Skyfall, they use the MacGuffin of the knock list as well.
I remember that. Yeah.
In 2012, I mean, 2012, when Skyfall came out, their Bond is looking for that knock list, and he gets shot off the top of a train at the beginning by
By
Moneypenny. And it's like, really, you guys, if there was ever an indication that the Bond franchise was stale, the fact they went back to the knock list as a MacGuffin. Mission Impossible, same thing.
Well, I think even with Quantum of Solace, the fact that they shot it more like a Bourne movie.
Right. Well, the problem was, I think they cut it like a Bourne movie, but they didn't shoot it like one, so they didn't have the coverage to make it. When you look at Paul Greengrass's, especially the third Bourne film, The Bourne Supremacy, that when I saw that movie, the action in it, as fast as that movie is cut, you never don't know where you are. The geography is always established, so you know where everyone is. Whereas in Quantum of Solace, the editorial, and I'm a Quantum of Solace apologist, but the action scenes don't work because Bond sequences allow the action to play out, and they're cut way too fast. So you never, like the plane, there's a plane chase in that movie, and it's cut so quickly. Cuts are a fake way to create action, because the more you cut, you're going like this all the time in your mind. Even
it's technically a mental stop. That's what it is. It's a mental stop.
That's exactly, absolutely. Now, in Paul Greengrass's movies, see, my own Rob Burnett theory of editorial is every cut should provide a new piece of information, whether it's visual, character-based, story-based, locations, whatever it is. Every single cut, the reason you cut is because you've already provided the information from this cut. Now there's new information to provide in the next cut. Now, with Greengrass's action sequences, he's figured out, when I saw Bourne Supremacy, I'm like, this is a truly, and by the way, no one picked up on this. There was not a lot of people, maybe in the John Wick franchise a little bit, but not so much.
Probably in the first one they got it, because the other one, John Wick's, I feels like they're going in the opposite direction with some of the cutting.
But the cutting in because you have to shoot the movie for this to work. But as fast as Bourne Supremacy, it's the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Ultimatum, and then the Bourne Supremacy.
I think so, yeah.
So it's the third Bourne movie, not the one with Jeremy Renner. But it's so well cut that each sequence, even if it lasts half a second, every single cut is providing you with more information, so you're never lost in those action sequences. Whereas in Quantum of Solace, or in for instance, the end of the first Transformers, the battle of the city when they're looking for the Allspark or whatever, is incoherent.
Oh yeah.
It's cut so fast, it's incoherent. You don't know where you are. You don't know where everybody is in relation to everybody else. There's never a wide establishing shot. And so you have no idea where you're going. So the fast cutting, it's
further discombobulates the audience. And
it doesn't. Whereas if you go back and watch any action sequence, the car chases, whatever, the when he leaps from one thing into another, the building, look at those action sequences. The cutting and the shooting is amazing. It's amazing because as fast as it moves, you always know where you are, and that's hard to do. That is a testament to Greengrass as a director. It's a testament to the cinematographer, and it's a testament to the editor, because they're totally working in tandem. Whereas Quantum of Solace is exactly the opposite. They wanted to make it like Bourne and cut it that fast, but they didn't shoot it that way. So the action sequences become incoherent. And it bothers me.
But what's also fascinating is that when it came to Mission Impossible, I think with the Brad Bird one is when they kind of stopped doing the type of quick cut scenes. Because I remember that a bunch of times in number 3, because number 3 was the first movie I went to where as I'm watching it, I'm getting a physical headache. And it's not just the cuts, but it's also some of the silliness with the story.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I think that what's really interesting is one of the things I love about McQuarrie's movies, Rogue Nation and Fallout, is they're very elegant.
Yeah.
As great as the action is and all that, they're beautifully shot. They're very elegant and old school in terms of their composition. They don't rely like Christopher Nolan. They don't rely or David Fincher on handheld. You know, it's like when Nolan does his fight scenes in Batman, he goes to handheld because it's hard to fight in those Batman suits. So it's hard to make a convincing fight scene. So you use handheld to create that extra added motion and there's that extra added energy in the frame.
And the
But if you
cuts
look,
right before of impact, I hate action films where they cut before the fist hits the body or the face or something
the
of that nature. It just
those are
takes it out.
that's a cheat.
Yeah.
It's again, it's that fast cutting, so it makes you, because you know it's coming, so it's a fake. To me, I call it fake action because you're not relying on your choreography. If you look at a movie like Gareth Edwards' The Raid and then The Raid 2 Barandal, he has these very long, it's martial arts, but he has these very long takes where you don't just see a punch, you see one, two, punch, parry, punch, and it's a single shot where people are moving in the same scene, and the choreography is so good, the action is so good that you're like, oh my god. And when someone gets thrown off a balcony and lands on an awning or something, they really did it. So
Or,
you're like,
yeah.
oh
Or when they, in that one scene, that tight room scene where the guy jams a fluorescent light bulb into his collarbone and it's done in the same shot. And it's like, that is brilliant staging, brilliant makeup, brilliant effects, and brilliant choreography. You don't see that type of stuff that often, unfortunately.
no. I mean, the John Wick's sequences, they have some incredible action in them. For me, the John Wick stuff gets a little repetitive because all the guns, and shooting people. I
Yeah.
like when they do other things, and I get it. And then it's like, how many assassins are there in the world? like like in John Wick, the very best people come out, or whatever. But by the time by John Wick 3, it's like everyone's an assassin. And with the Baba Yaga, there should only be like one or two people in the world that are equipped to go against him.
Yeah.
And but it's fine. I mean, it's but back to the original, your original premise of, now I was kind of mad about Jim Phelps being the villain too, but now going back and watching it, I think it works for that particular movie. I'll buy it, but now I was wondering as I went back and rewatch it, do I buy it now because I've seen it happen so many times? Because back then
like
it was
you're
pretty
desensitized to it. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, of course. Nowadays I just assume, oh, the old mentor that was your friend that brought you up, yeah, he's the villain. That's now I just expect it. It's now it's a well-worn trope.
Yeah. So, okay. So how does that work in comparison to the verdict, where you have the same type of betrayal? A love interest is brought in. These two get close together. She helps him a little bit with his case. And then you have that scene where he's going to his bar, giving a speech. And then she's just kind of in a trauma state, sitting on the sofa, getting
I mean,
handed her check.
do you know it's all about how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how it's done because back then that was 82. They trick you when you realize how devious James Mason and his team of lawyers really are.
Yeah.
The fact that you pointed out before you recorded this, that they set him up from the very beginning. They knew his type. They knew where he hung out, where his drinking hole is. They made her go there, and he of course noticed her, and she. And what's interesting too is we, the audience, I mean, now I don't know if it would work. I always tell people to watch The Verdict, but it's 41 years old. And I think people now, unfortunately, can see it coming. But at the time, even now, when I watch that movie, it kills me every maybe
because
it's
you're
like
pulling for them as a couple. Like they sell it well.
and I'm just like, maybe this time they'll get it's like I don't know if you've ever seen the Woody Allen movie, The Purple Rose of Cairo. But it's a fantasy where the things that are in a movie changes, and there's a moment where this movie's playing, and one of the audience members goes, I want what happened last week to happen this week. Otherwise, what's life all about? And I kind of feel that way about The Verdict. I'm like, can it just be different this time? Maybe this time she won't sell him down the river. Maybe. And it's so great because at the end you think, oh, maybe they'll get together. Nope.
Just lets that phone ring.
because I mean, she's too, it was too, you can't come back from that.
No, you can't. I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, that scene comes only a handful of minutes after she has that big soliloquy in the bedroom, right? When he's kind of freaking out.
Oh yeah.
And so you get the sense like they really built, like David Mamet really builds up the fact that these two care a lot for each other and are willing to tell them the stuff that they don't want to hear because they need to hear it. And then a couple moments later, there's the reveal, and yeah, it's like it's a gut punch, and it's a really good gut punch.
Oh,
Um,
well, you know, it's funny now, you see in the post Me Too era, there was all of this trust all women.
right.
And I'm like, unless you watch The Verdict.
Yeah.
You know,
Verdict or
I
any classic film noir from the 40s to
yeah,
the 60s.
or you know, something like Basic Instinct. And I
Oh
it's
yeah.
such a weird, and by the way, I don't mean to make light
Fatal
of that.
Attraction. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what the funny thing about, to me, the great thing about movies is the way you can delve into human nature. And we, you know, I'm addicted to true crime. One of my favorite things now on YouTube is watching interrogations of people that like turn out to be killers or criminals. There's all kinds of where you can, I don't know if it's the Freedom of Information Act, but they have all of these interrogations that they've had to make public, you know, various
Yeah.
police stations. And there's a lot of them where people are revealed, and you can see, I find them fascinating. And what's really interesting is how a lot of these cops really know what they're doing. These detectives who get into these rooms and have to get the information in a specific way from these people that have done bad things. And I've grown very appreciative of the techniques of a lot of these detectives. They're like unsung heroes because they're pretty good at what they do. And the fact that it's men and women, they're all equally guilty. People do horrible things. You know, we live in a terrible, horrible charnel house of a world.
Yeah, I've seen a number of those. I've also seen the reverse where the police are doing everything they can to get either a confession or at least a slip up, and the criminal is just always ahead of them. And it
Yeah.
reminds me of the televised interview, like the last interview of Ted Bundy. And he is working that interviewer like a fiddle, telling him
Mm-hmm.
everything he wants to hear. And what's fantastic, and I would be reading comments, I'd read articles that studying this. So many people believed what Ted Bundy was saying to be true when he's not. He's absolutely 100% lying to them about
Yeah.
everything because he knows if he feeds it into this guy here, maybe he will convince the governor to pardon him so he'll be alive long enough and work for the establishment to profile these other killers, because that's what he was banking on at that point when he realized there's no way I'm getting out of this one. And
Right.
it's like it's great. It's fascinating because it gets you inside a head. And for me as a writer, that's kind of what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the motivations. I'm trying to see what is beneath the words that they're saying, and carefully pick out what's going on to try and see like, oh, how can I capture that in a story? How can I? Because you mentioned David Mamet, him, William Goldman, and
Yeah.
Robert Towne, some of the best dialogue writers and screenwriters to ever grace the industry. And it's like those are the ones you want to, at the very least, meet in regards to quality. And if you're damn good, try and surpass to so that you can stand shoulder to shoulder with those names, like on your headstone, so to speak. And it's really hard to do that, but they nail it because they really get into the minutia of what it is that people want to do and why they want to do it.
Oh, you know, Robert Towne directed a movie. It's not a great movie, but I love it. It's a good movie. It came out in 1988. It's called Tequila Sunrise, and it stars Kurt
Yes.
Russell, Mel Gibson, and Michelle Pfeiffer. You know, it's about a former drug dealer, his best friend who's a cop, who's a detective, and the woman they both love. And Raul Julia plays a cartel lord or whatever that Mel Gibson owes a bunch of money to, that he's been holding on to for years, because Raul Julia hasn't come back to get it because Mel Gibson went to jail. And it's Robert Towne, and I love this movie so much because I could just listen to people talk to each other. I love the movie, but the character interplay between Michelle Pfeiffer and Mel Gibson, and the character interplay between Michelle Pfeiffer and Kurt Russell, and then the character interplay between Raul Julia and Mel Gibson. I could just watch this movie forever. I love this movie. And, you know, I have it on Blu-ray, and no one ever really talks about it. When it came out, people were disappointed in it. They said, well, you know, Robert, that's good. You know, it's like a standard studio movie with 4 movie stars, but Raul Julia is more of a character actor. But still, I still love this movie just because I love the dialogue. I love the way they talk to each other. You know, I love everything about it. And I miss, and this is a big Warner Brothers release in 1988. And I just miss that. I miss the fact that, and look, we're getting a lot of great writing on a lot of streaming shows. There's a lot of these mystery shows that last 10 episodes, whether they're based on Harlan Corbin's books. You see those on Netflix all the time or whatever. I like all that, but I do really miss the 2-hour studio mystery detective thriller. I mean, the studio would never make Chinatown again.
No,
they're never gonna make Fatal Attraction again. They've made it as a TV series. And you're like, why?
Yeah.
Why
No,
are
right.
you making Fatal Attraction as a TV series? I mean, it was so good as a 2-hour movie, you know, and I get it because they're remaking they're turning all of these movies into these long streaming shows. And that's fine, but I miss the 2-hour form, you know, the story form that a movie is. Now everything's spectacle, but I love spectacle, but I still love movies like The Verdict and Tequila Sunrise and Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct and The Last Seduction and call it whatever. Take your pick of we don't have those anymore. They're gone. And
It's a lost art, really, because everything. Here's the other part too: the discipline required to write a movie like that.
Yeah, I mean, the last one I saw that I loved was Gone Girl.
Oh yeah, Ben Affleck in them,
and that was based on a book. They had Gillian Flynn's novel, and she wrote the script based on her book. And it was funny because when I read that, because I read a lot of detective fiction books like that. I have a lot like the Dave Robichaux books that James Lee Burke writes, or the novels of Andrew Vaux, or even the like they've turned everything now into a show, like the Harry Bosch novels, the Michael Connelly novels. Read a lot of those. They've turned them all into streaming shows, you know, and they'll do one in a season. They'll do a book a season or whatever, which is fine. But I do miss that. When I saw Gone Girl, I thought, because I love the book. I read the book in one sitting. I love that book. And I thought it was fantastic. And the movie was equally fantastic. Maybe it was even better to a certain extent. But you know, you watch that, and that, to me, that movie was so satisfying. Even I'd read the book and I went and saw the movie, and Fincher did such a great job of realizing. Same with Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, although I thought the Swedish version was better. It still worked as that 2-hour mystery movie. People are talking, love story, whatever. I miss that so much, and we don't have it at all anymore.
And I wish I had an explanation as to why, because they're cheap to make, very lucrative. But the other part too is that it's they're being remade and padded out. Like that's the thing that kind of bothers me. It's padded out, and I just don't. I'm wondering, like, is it the model that's being requested of them, where they're saying, okay, we're doing a Fatal Attraction, we're going to make it a TV series. But when you look at what the premise is, it's like, this is not a series. Like you're milking it unnecessarily longer than it has to be, because it's actually quite a very instant story. And one of the things that I remember and learning early on in writing is that if you can tell a story in the tightest amount of time, like in universe, it keeps the audience more engaged. If you have, say, like 72 hours or 48 hours or 24 hours or 12 hours, or for instance, a great movie with lots of great dialogue based off a play as well, 12 Angry Men.
Oh,
beautiful film.
I just watched the new 4K disc of that. It's what a great movie.
Yes. And it's very engaging, and it's almost as if the padding out is to sort of blind people of the character work that they need to do in order to make it an engaging show or an engaging subject. Because if you keep on throwing other conflicts in there to sort of get your 6 episode or your 8 episode length, you're using those conflicts to try and define the character as opposed to the character defining the conflict. That's the way that I see it. Maybe I'm wrong. It's just something I kind of picked out because it's whereas when you have something like either a 90-minute movie, hour 45, or a 2 hour, you have to pick the moments that are going to have the hardest impact on what you're telling in that movie, and that's going to have more resonance as opposed to just throwing in a whole bunch of other ones in there just to kind of build up to that pivotal moment that you want to do.
Well, it's interesting to me. Like, one of my favorite fellow Canadian, David Cronenberg, is one of I've been a Cronenberg fan since the 70s, and I think his best movie is Dead Ringers. Mm-hmm. Now, we just saw a series version of Dead Ringers starring Rachel Weisz playing the Mantle twins, the same way that Jeremy Irons played the twins in the movie, and it's padded out. And I thought it didn't work at all. You know, I went in wanting to love it, and you know, it was a female lead, which I thought was a mistake because there was something really transgressive about a male doctor making tools to operate on mutant women. Yeah. Like, there was something really horrific that was kind of missing from, and I think they really sort of missed. I understand what they were going for, but I'm like, why? About halfway through the series, I'm like, why is any of this? It felt incredibly contrived. I ultimately didn't believe any of it. I was watching this, and even the philanthropic families that were going to give the Mantle twins money, I'm like, what is this? What is this weird, evil Terry Gilliam universe that we've stepped into? And I feel like there's so much writing now that is being done. It's supposed to be edgy and weird for its own sake without grounding. And so it hasn't earned, you know, if you want to, like, people are watching Twin Peaks. David Lynch can pull off David Lynch.
Yeah.
But so many people are looking to David Lynch and hoping to pull off David Lynch. The same way in the mid-90s, after Pulp Fiction, we had a spate of movies that were bargain basement Tarantino. Everybody was aping, you know, 2 Days in the Valley, or whatever the hell you want to call it, How Many Heads in a Duffel Bag. And everybody was trying to rip off Tarantino, but nobody really understood what made Tarantino. And it was all very surface oriented, and they weren't getting to the heart of it all, you know. And that was because the heart of it is that Quentin Tarantino completely understood the form. You know, he's such a fanatic about movies and character and all that he really understood holistically everything he needed to do, not just only as a writer, but as a director, to sell all of this stuff. You know, yeah, there's a great video where Jamie Foxx is talking about when he first went in, like after the first day of shooting, Tarantino, or maybe it was in the audition, but I think it was the first day, Tarantino took him in the room, and the way Jamie Foxx tells it, he's like, what the fuck was that? And Jamie Foxx is like, well, you know, and Quentin Tarantino's like, you know, you come in here with your Range Rover and your Louis Vuitton bag and all that, and you're like trying to be all cool. And Tarantino's like, you're a fucking slave. You're a slave. You're not cool. You're a slave. and really had to set Jamie Foxx correctly on what was happening in Django Unchained and how to play the character. And Jamie Foxx listened because he's a smart guy and a very gifted actor, and was able to do what Tarantino wanted him to do. But I feel that the moral of that story is, I think all of these people would have allowed Jamie Foxx to try and be cool in the role and not take him back. And I think that, and say, listen, you know, the way you got to see how Jamie Foxx, I love Jamie Foxx's Tarantino impression. What the fuck was that? I think he's on like Howard Stern. I think it's a Howard Stern interview. It's a radio interview or something. Look it up, because it's really, I watch it a lot. It's really fun to watch Jamie Foxx tell the story, because he explains how Tarantino's a great director, and this is how he learned to play a part. And he learned a lot from this, because Will Smith didn't get the part because he wanted to be the hero. He wanted to play this more of this heroic character, and didn't want to play the slave Django, and then who has this journey to go on.
Yeah.
And I think that in the case of, I just feel that we are missing out. We don't have the writers that we used to have. And I think it's a combination of, because the writers that we have now do not come out of the classical tradition. You know, they didn't, I mean, hell, they've probably never read Aristotle and read Poetics. or gone back and read all the great dramatists over the years, and we see it in the writing, and it bums me out. At least when you watch Mission Impossible, what struck me is like, oh, even though it's a little Baroque because it's Brian De Palma, so a lot of it's a little kind of slanted in De Palma land, it's still you're watching these characters, and the words that they're saying are so cool. Like, oh, I really like just watching these characters talk to each other.
Oh yeah, like that's the little brief scene between Tom Cruise and Emilio Estevez, just teaching him about the gum, and it's like,
Yeah,
you remember that hasta lasagna, don't get any on you. Like, oh, that's catchy, that's clever, it's cool. And then you have the other quote there where, they're talking like, oh yeah, we know somebody in my office named Jack who's constantly late, just kind of digging at them. You get this layer of relationship, and then he goes in the elevator, so it's like, that date with Sarah is definitely off. Like, it's just
right. Yeah, I mean, that to me is, and I'll tell you something. We saw that kind of writing even in the MCU, like in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. There was some really crisp writing that I feel that we've kind of lost. And who wrote, I forget his name, the writer of Quantum Mania. When I saw him on the red carpet at the red carpet event, I was
Loveness.
Loveness. I was really pulling for him.
Me too.
And I wanted him, and it didn't work out. He's not going to get the other scripts that he was going to write. But when I saw the script, when I watched that movie, I'm like, this movie is not written the way it should have been written.
No.
And it bummed me out because I'm always pulling for writers to do well. And it's frustrating to watch. And at least Chris McQuarrie is a very smart writer. And even though, he admits, I kind of make up these Mission Impossible movies as we're going along. And he did say that. And there is an element of that in both Rogue Nation and in Fallout, but I don't care because the set pieces are so elegant.
Not only that, like, he pays attention to what he did before. Like, right. That's the other part. How many times have you watched a show where you're like, did they even pay attention to what was like 3 pages ago? It boggles my mind, because if the writer doesn't pay attention to it, you're expecting either, if not the actor, at least at the very bare minimum, the director. A lot of the newer directors that I've encountered with, one part, because there's a period where I'd be called in because, like, oh yeah, you've got an interesting youthful look and stuff. Do you want to be in the scene for like 2 seconds of background? You get one line, whatever. Come on in, read, just see if you can do it. And one of the things I noticed when I got to participate in those things is that the director would never tell me what the character is doing going through there. They said, tell me how you would do it. And I'm like, you want my interpretation of how I would do something in this scene? And they're like, yes.
How would I direct this scene is what you're asking me.
Well, it's either how would I direct this scene, or I'm looking at the dialogue and the dialogue's like, oh, the character is very cowardly. But they're telling me, okay, so this guy bumps into you. How would you act? And I'm like, well, if a guy bumps into me, I don't care. Like, I wouldn't do it. I would say these lines in a way that I don't care, because that's me. You're not asking me how the character should act. But then we have Tarantino telling Jamie Foxx, you're a slave. Like, that's what you are. Like, he's not saying, what would you do, Jamie? He's saying, you're a slave. Right. You are a slave. And I don't see many directors in my peer group, or even some of the little bit older than me, and especially many younger, say that. They're like, what do you do? It's like they're trying to do something authentic. It's like, no, you were being the character. What would you do in this situation? I'm just shy of 6 feet, and I don't take crap from a lot of people when in very peculiar situations. I try to be very respectful, courteous, but if you cross a line, I'm either going to completely dismiss you, or I'm going to call you out. And I don't care if I get punched in the face. And it's like, but that's not the role. So if I'm not being told what the role is and you want me to do this, like, that's bad directing, because you're not telling me what you want. You're telling me what you think I want. And that's not the job of the actor. And I think that's also coming into relation with some of the stories and screenplays where the character, some of the writers are not writing what the character should be doing. They're writing what they would do in that situation as the character.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that we see a lot of, it's frustrating to see things that, like, I'll give you an example. It's probably a bad example, but like She-Hulk, the TV series She-Hulk. Yeah. I had read the John Byrne run on that comic with the breaking the fourth wall, and it was all right there. Their inspiration was all right there, but they didn't do that. And what was really interesting was a superhero legal drama could have been great. It could have been a really interesting thing, especially the realization of John Byrne's run on that. But that show was, I never knew what it was supposed to be from 1 minute to the next. And I don't think the writers did. And I don't think the directing staff did. And it was weird to watch that show because I don't think I've seen a show in a long time which so didn't work. And yet it had a great central performance. It had a great actress and Tatiana Maslany that she could have done anything.
Yeah.
And she tried her hardest, but that show was a show that had no cohesion from moment to moment, episode to episode, scene to scene. And I'm like, how does this go so far off the rails by the people that are making it? And, there's so much talk to me, all the talk about, I always say, never put your agenda or your universe before your characters and story. That's my big axiom that I'm always repeating. But I'm finding right now is I think there's a lot of people that are writing that don't know what the story they're trying to tell actually is. And we see a lot of that because television and streaming shows are made so quickly. And we're seeing a lot of, why did they have to, the craziest story I've heard lately is that the Amazon show Citadel, the people that were actually making it, the Russo brothers that were producers on it had their own edit room. And they were recutting their own versions of the episodes, and the production team didn't even know they were doing it. And
so there are two edits of every episode then?
Two edits of every. So the Russo brothers were like, none of this works. We need to come in and redo all these episodes, which they did, which is why it cost $300 million for 6 40-minute shows.
Gosh.
But I'm like, how do you get into a position now where you have two of the big producers on the show are cutting their own versions of the episodes and not telling the production staff, the producers, the day-to-day, the line producers, the people that are working on the show, the directors? How do you not tell them this? And then they end up going back to Amazon, or pardon me, they go back to Amazon, and they get the money they needed to go back and rework the episodes and reshoot a bunch of stuff. Like, how does that even happen? It happens because nobody has a handle on what they're making anymore because people don't know what they're doing. And I think people don't know what they're doing because if you've only ever watched Buffy and Battlestar Galactica to bring it on home, you really don't know how to write.
Yeah.
And when it comes to movies like Mission Impossible, I mean, Chris McQuarrie is a gifted writer. I mean, the man won an Academy Award for the second movie he ever wrote, which was Usual Suspects. And he knows how to write, and he can make an improvised Mission Impossible script work. But not many people can do that. And I just wish that in this day and age, when more money is at stake than ever before, great storytelling, great writing is at the core of all of it. And I feel that we have, especially at the feature film level, so many movies now are missing the quality of writing that we need to have them be successful. And I think at the end of the day, everyone's asking themselves, well, why did this movie fail? Why did that movie fail? They failed because the stories that are being told are not, first, they're not true to whatever it is you're trying to do. The story you've decided to tell within this milieu doesn't work. And two, the story that you are telling in this milieu doesn't work either. And it's weird. And I think it's strange because there's not a lot of people at the top, at the corporate level that understand storytelling anyway. And yet now that corporations are all in charge of our big studios, corporations don't know how to tell stories. What corporate executive has any training in storytelling other than the lies they tell to each other all day long? But seriously, where are the people that know story? I mean, in 1988, when Robert Towne was given given an opportunity to direct a movie by Warner Brothers, they knew that at least his script the movie might not turn out to be the most visually dynamic thing in the world, but they had enough confidence in the man who wrote Chinatown and all the other scripts he wrote to know that whatever we get is at least going to be worthy with our stars. There's going to be something there that works. But I don't know if studios can say that today. How many writers can carry a studio movie?
Not many. I believe there's a lot of writers out there, but whatever the politics are in Hollywood, and there's always been politics in Hollywood.
Yeah.
They're either too green to figure out a way to kind of manipulate that system, which I myself admitted that, because again, I don't live there as often as I wanted to. So every time I come back after 5 or 6 months, I have to kind of relearn the new dynamic, because that's how fast the industry changes. Someone who might be in a really powerful position at a studio in January might not be there in September. And if you've built that relationship based on that and they're gone somewhere else, you can still follow up with that relationship, but it's going to be in a completely different dynamic and a completely different atmosphere than what you were prepared for. And then the other part too is that because there's not so much discipline in the screenwriting process, you're not building up the inspiration that a director and a cast would get to really deliver a fantastic execution of that. And one of the things I've noticed is that even a lot of the poorer films that have come out over the last decade or so, I think the concepts are absolutely solid. Like they're
Oh yeah,
really intriguing. Like you give me a concept with, to bring it in closer home, to say The Last Jedi, where Luke Skywalker has found a justifiable reason to think that the Jedi shouldn't exist anymore. If you, that premise alone is fine, but you have to execute it by giving a very in universe believable justification for why he thinks this is a bad idea.
100%.
And I don't think the movie delivered on that.
Yeah,
All.
no, I look, I think you can make anybody believe anything. And the idea of maybe the Jedi were wrong, or that's an intriguing idea.
Yes.
Again, it has to be well written. I think though that the real problem was with the sequel trilogy, how did the galaxy, going, I always harp on this, but going from Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens, how did our heroes at the end of Jedi, the next movie, when it opens, the First Order is taken over, they've built Starkiller Base, there's TIE fighters all over the place. How is that allowed to happen?
Yeah.
And the question is, our main characters, you've immediately established that our main characters are idiots. In the last 30 years, they let the galaxy descend right back into where it was that you defeated them in the last movie. And when I saw Force Awakens the first time, I'm like, you're not explaining to me how any of this occurred. You're saying that there's a resistance, that Leia's now running, instead of the rebellion, she's running the resistance. Well, how'd she allow a resistance to be needed in the first place?
Yeah.
And these are questions. If the audience has to ask these questions, or you have to read a tie-in novel to understand what's going on, you haven't done your job. It hasn't happened. And when you're doing a mystery, whether it's a Gone Girl or a Mission Impossible movie, you have to understand more than ever, what is your villain, who the antagonist, what has the antagonist done, why have they done it, how have they done it, and how is our protagonist going to overcome what the antagonist has done to them? And those are very simple, necessary asks, but so often it's a hard thing to write. It's a hard thing to make that clockwork construction that we love for mysteries, because when mysteries work, they're some of the most fun things to watch, especially like, even though I read the book first, Gone Girl, when I was reading Gone Girl, and you're like, oh my God, did he kill his wife? Like, what's going on? And then you cut to a chapter where suddenly the female character, the amazing Amy, is now narrating the story.
Yeah.
Your chapter's in. When I was reading the book, I was like, no way. I was sitting out in my backyard at the time. It was in like the middle of summer or whatever. And I read that book in one sitting. I was like, oh my God, like it really got me. It really got me. I didn't see it coming. And it really got me. And I think a lot of people that didn't read the book, they actually were able to pull it off in the movie too. Fincher did a great job pulling it off, because you're like, you like Ben Affleck's character. He's kind of like this sad sack guy. And as the onions are peeled away, suddenly you're like, did he kill his wife? Did he do it? And you buy into it. And that was the construction. I give all credit to Gillian Flynn for writing that. That's what we all want. When we go to the movies.
It's the difference between the surprise and the deconstruction.
Yes. And I miss it. I really do. And I remember the first time I saw the Swedish version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I had not read the books. I didn't know what was up. And I saw this. I love the Swedish version of the movie. And I was surprised by it. When you find out, because the main character becomes friends with the serial killer, and when the serial killer reveals himself, I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
It got to me, and I think that's why people love the book, because it had that kind of a reveal, and everybody was reading that book, and it delivered. The Swedish version of the movie, especially the longer TV version for Swedish television, even works better. I didn't love the Fincher version as much as I wanted to, and maybe that was because I knew the story. So I was looking at it like, what about the story did he not bring to it as opposed to what he did bring to it?
Well, one of the other difficult tricks with regards to making a mystery is that by the time of the reveal, the pieces have to make sense. You have to have that revelation, like, oh, I see how it all fits together.
And with Phelps and Mission Impossible,
kind of dropped the ball there. I mean, here's the other idea. If they had retained the love triangle from the first draft, and that was the entire reason why Phelps was doing this, is like he found the perfect woman, and for some reason he was threatened by this younger guy because of their age difference.
Yeah, there's your motivation.
There's your motivation. And but the other part too, it also betrays him a little bit because it makes him kind of a weak man. But I mean, you can still make that work, and you understand it far more, because right now, like as you said, oh, it's about the money, and it just feels kind of disingenuous, and something that more recently that felt a little disingenuous because it was a contrived reason to get the character in this position that they otherwise wouldn't be in, and that was Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny. I thought a lot of the ideas presented in it could have worked very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But something just felt off. It didn't quite feel like a mangled film, in my opinion. Something was just kind of missing from all of that. I don't understand why. I mean, from the interviews I've read, I get the interesting dynamic of a father without a son and a daughter without a father, and those two coming together kind of fill those roles with each other. I'm like, that's a good idea. I dig that. And I think that could work with a character like Indiana Jones if pulled in right. But the one thing that kind of made me feel like it didn't feel authentic is the fact that I don't believe a character like Indiana Jones would accept retirement.
No.
And that's what threw me off.
I completely, and not only that, the old man, the bitter old man trope is so played out. I mean, we saw it, in 1992 in Unforgiven. I know William Money was walking the straight and narrow and all that, but as a pig farmer and stuff, when he wanted better for his kids when he took off to get that money, but you still play that out. It was great. To me, it was the best. It's one of my favorite movies ever. But with Indiana Jones, I don't believe that a character like Indiana Jones, after all that he's seen, everything that he's seen, he's literally seen evidence of the power of God coming out of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
He's seen the Sankara stones. He's seen aliens. So in 1969, if man is landing on the moon, he should be the first person to get behind. He'd be like, I wonder what you're going to find up there. You might not, you might be very surprised. Like he would be excited. And the fact that if you're 70 years old, as he is supposed to be canonically in that movie, and you've seen, because think of all the adventures we haven't seen that Indiana Jones has gone on, all the other mysticism or whatever he found in Stonehenge or whatever the hell he might have discovered, Cthulhu, the old ones, the Mountains of Madness, wherever Indiana Jones went.
Yeah.
The man would have a perspective on life, the universe, and what goes on and where we come from that no one else has a perspective of. So for him to be a burnout academic and depressed about his life, I mean, in my mind, he would be Gandalf. He would be Gandalf the White, who has the infinite wisdom that nobody else has. He's still an adventurer. But for him to sit there and go, I've seen a lot of strange things. I'm like, no, dude, you haven't seen a lot of strange things. You've seen evidence of God's power coming out of the Ark of the Covenant, even though you didn't actually.
God's power in the Grail.
In the Grail, How do you've met a 500-year-old knight in a room with no food, and he's never left, and he's been there, and you saved your father's life because of that. If you're that guy, what do you think about in the rest of your life? And I feel as a writing, I mean, and also remember, Indiana Jones is supposed to be fun.
Yes.
And it's a movie where the opening, I mean, you've got the great set piece and all that. That was fun. But when you finally meet him in the present day in 1969, it's no longer fun.
No.
And the character of Indiana Jones, that trope of an old man and going on this adventure, and he's like, "Well, leave me here. I don't want to go back. There's nothing left for me." I'm like, what is this character? This is not Indiana Jones. Because and to try and bring, everyone wants to inject, well, you have to inject all this pathos into the character. I don't disagree, but with the character of Indiana Jones, all of that is secondary. I mean, you know, they do the callback of when Indiana Jones is on the boat, the Bantu Wind and Raiders, and
Yeah.
they're doing the Kiss My, they replay that.
I thought that was disingenuous because it's someone else's work that they're repurposing.
And modern Star Trek, I mean, my God, all that is, and you look at that and you think to yourself, okay, well, why is it that Indiana Jones, you've not made me believe that a character that's seen what he's seen, this is the kind of guy that should be zen about life, going, you know, there's a lot more out there than there's a, what is the line from, is it Hamlet, that I dreamt of than in your reality? You know, that there's a lot more out there in heaven and earth, or philosophy, or whatever, that is in your philosophy.
There's your philosophy. So
yeah,
so that brings in an interesting idea, because when I think of like what would be Indiana Jones, what would Jones be doing after the Crystal Skull? I still think he'd be teaching at Connecticut, and I would have opened the movie with a whole bunch of students holding history books going into the campus bar. And on this particular night, it's a Friday night, and it's a contest because Marion is running the bar, the campus bar, and it's Stump the Professor. And it's Indiana Jones just sitting on a stool, and they're bringing up questions about archaeology and stuff. And whoever like beats him wins a drink for that night. And if they lose, they have to do a shot of whiskey.
Or they get drinks for the night.
Drinks for the night, something of that way. Stump the Professor, because there you have him still in a teaching environment. You also have a whole bunch of kids excited to try and see if they could one up the great Indiana Jones, Professor Jones, Dr. Jones. And he showed the fact that he's very, very happy. And then if you want to play into the pathos, you have, as soon as they come home from the bar that night, a Vietnam soldier is at the door with a letter who has to give him the bad news that either Mutt is dead or missing. And that's how you can start off a really cool story.
Dude, I'm getting chills. What a scene that would have been.
That would have been brilliant.
And it would have been so much fun because, you know, I think back, one of my favorite scenes in a movie is when Will Hunting humiliates that douchebag in the bar in Good Will Hunting. You know, he knows because his photographic mind or whatever, he knows all the books the guy's read. Well, that's you got that from Vicus.
Yeah.
You know, when are you going to sit here and then we're going to go on and read this book, or read, you know, and then you're going to be quoting Gordon Wood, whatever. I mean, I that would have been a great scene, because it would have also showed, it could have showed you could have touched on different things, Indiana Jones adventures that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
Like, you were, Dr. Jones, you were involved in this thing that happened in at the end of World War II. You were in the mountains of Antarctica doing this. And so there was a whole ship disappeared. What happened with that? You could have had him say, well, you know, and it could have been really fun to like build up something and then show how much he still loved archaeology and loved the chase, loved the adventure.
Or like having a fun questions like, oh, we you know, archaeologists believe that the lost city of Atlantis is off the coast of England. He's like, well, actually, no, it's more like closely between the lakes around Italy. And
right.
he's like, well, how would you know that? And he just pulls out all these fun little facts of the time, and it allows the audience to infer that he's been there. So you relate to the video game, making it canonical, and all the other stories, and it's just, you want to have this kind of, it's a different type of dynamic, because usually with every Indiana Jones film, it starts with him in the midst of an adventure. But now we're in an old age where he has to be very conscious of the fact that his body is not what it was. So how do you have him still be an archaeologist and teaching people in your opening kind of prologue, and then you hit them into the point where it's like, okay, now we're doing kind of a more like, you know, a story about family as opposed to.
Yeah, and the thing about that is it's a fun scene.
Yes.
As opposed to, you know, I just don't believe that Indiana Jones, a character like Indiana Jones, would ever be looked down upon his students wouldn't be bored. And I understand they all wanted to be at the ticker tape parade. And I think that they should have been at I think Indiana
I think
Jones
he
should have
would have
let
been
them
leading
go.
it.
He
I
would have
think
been leading it because, he's like, Dr. Jones, it's really interesting. The book, A Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken about ancient astronauts and aliens. That book came out in 1968. And you could have even made some reference. Someone's like, Dr. Jones, I just read this book by Eric von Däniken. He's talking about all these sites about aliens and ancient aliens. Do you think that's true? Because it's only a year later,
yeah, it's
and
like, if not aliens, interdimensional beings.
interdimensional beings, and that's what he could have said that, and it would have been so funny, but again, and it would have been fun. That's what Indiana Jones is fun. And everybody, look, they did the same thing to James Bond in 4 movies. In Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. They took this character that is clearly enjoying what he's doing for a living, and they turned him into the most dour, miserable, depressed human being ever for 4 movies over a decade.
4 sadly forgettable films compared to the pantheon of James Bond. That's what's kind of, I will say that some of their opening numbers, like, again, you say you're a Quantum of Solace apologist. I have no problems with that because Jack White's opening.
It's one of my favorite theme songs, and it is the most maligned theme song. That opening theme song is I love that theme song. It's my favorite modern Bond theme song. It's so good.
Yeah.
And that movie, again, done during another writer's strike.
Yeah.
And they had a real problem with they had problems with having they couldn't rewrite the script. They couldn't fix the problems. And in movies like that, they have to be able to be iterative during the process. You have to be able to change things up and make sure they work and
you
come
figure
around
stuff out with dailies. And in our last conversation, we were talking about, well, how many people watch dailies anymore, or do they just claim they do? And do we get table reads where table reads reveal so much with regards to the script?
Oh my God.
Good writers pay attention to and solve, because it just feels like the desire to get stuff out. And I think even with regards to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, this is probably pretty prevalent. They were so worried about getting the release date that they had to have sacrificed other aspects of it in order to make that window. And Mission Impossible was delayed a year. The first one was delayed a year, supposed to come out in 1995. They delayed it a year because they had to get certain locations done, and they also knew that they had to get the script just right for this to work. And even with our discussion today, there's good reason to argue maybe they could have taken another crack at the draft. But at the end of the day, it still made a lot of money, and it started a franchise that 26 years later is still being made with the same lead actor,
which is insane.
It is insane. It's unprecedented too, because it is a competitor to Bond, but unlike with Bond, it's still got the same actor in every, now I guess going to be 7, now 8 films straight. And there's never been a Bond actor who's done, I think, 8 straight films.
No, and Ving Rhames has been in all of them too.
Ving Rhames as well, yeah.
And it's funny because he wanted it to be, I think, a showcase for different directors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you went from Bond to John Woo, and Tom Cruise is a big Alias fan, so got J.J. Abrams, and then you had Brad Bird, which is a really audacious choice, I thought, for 4. As his first live action movie.
He did really good. Like, he hit the spy genre well with The Incredibles. Like, he bridged spy and superheroes brilliantly in that movie.
Yep. And then finally he hooked up with McHugh. McQuarrie wrote Valkyrie. They started a relationship, and they made the Jack Reacher movie together.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tom Cruise brought him on. He's been a producer and a writer on his other movies, even if he didn't direct them. And now they have a sweet spot. They've got because McQuarrie, and they both, knowing McQuarrie, like McQuarrie always wanted to be where he is. Nobody has earned their place in the Hollywood pantheon as a director, I think, more than Chris McQuarrie has, because he went through the idea. He earned an Oscar early on. He
reinvented himself too. That's the other part. He had to. He made a bunch of mistakes, and he learned from them. And it's a great hero's journey too, where you start strong, you have a stumble, but you don't give up. And that's
and he made, and there were times when he did want to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And like Brian and him had a big falling out over the first X-Men. He left the first X-Men, and Brian couldn't use John Ottman on the first X-Men, so they didn't have, that was not a great experience for Brian. And then seeing what McQuarrie did, he kind of laid fallow. He did a lot of script doctoring and all that, but then he came back because Brian and Chris were incredibly passionate about von Stauffenberg's story, and I think that movie is incredibly underrated. I think it's a really underrated movie that it doesn't get nearly talked about enough. People are like, wait, Tom Cruise played a Nazi?
Yep.
Yes, he did. And Chris McQuarrie wrote it. And then it also went from being a $30 million movie to being like a $90 million movie or something. But I think that film is much better than it gets credit for. And, Tom Cruise was probably the one that got it made. So, and then from then on, they were off to the races, and Chris McQuarrie forged a relationship in steel with Tom Cruise. And I think that that's fantastic. I love seeing Tom Cruise is now a producer. He knows how to make movies, and he'll probably end up working with Chris McQuarrie for the rest of his career.
Yeah. He said he has 20 more years. He wants to keep doing these things.
I would love to see Chris McQuarrie write a Les Grossman movie. I mean, the less you talk about the Saturday Night Live characters or whatever, but if they could make from Tropic Thunder, Tom Cruise's Les Grossman character, like a biopic, and treat it like Les Grossman's a real guy, and just play it like Les Grossman.
That's the one thing, like, because Tom Cruise proved he can do comedy, and he does have a sense of humor. A lot of the people that have met him, he likes to joke, and he has very friendly jokes.
Right.
And it's like, well, I mean, I understand why he wants to be the action lead and the romantic lead and stuff, because all actors love those moments, and you get a great high bringing that joy to audiences when you do it right. But we are in essentially a kind of comedy drought. And if there's one guy that could make a movie that's a comedy that would convince producers to back it and, to distribute it internationally, it's probably Tom Cruise at this point. And I don't see any reason why he couldn't be at the forefront of that, especially if you get, bring in Ben Stiller again, who helped to define that character, and have him and McQuarrie work together for biopic set pieces. And then you inject it with the silly comedy that happens within Hollywood. Because the other part too, the sad realization that I had is, as much as I love that town, as much as I love that industry, we're all a bunch of clowns in some regard.
Oh yeah, no, of course. And I mean, you could do a great Hollywood satire. I mean, it could be the way that the Player was.
Mm-hmm.
The Player obviously is very serious, but I like movies about Hollywood, and the Player is a great one. A movie called What Just Happened that stars Robert De Niro, that Barry Levinson directed, that not a lot of people saw, but it's based on Art Linson, producer Art Linson. It's his story. It is the movie's great. I love the movie, but it's painful to watch because there's so much reality. And I've often said to people, well, Rob, what does a producer do? I'm like, you got to watch What Just Happened. You got to watch Robert De Niro and What Just Happened. And there's so many other actors. It's just painful. It's painful to watch that movie, but they could make the great Hollywood satire, the Les Grossman story, whatever it would be called.
It'd be like a Citizen Kane, where he's died and people are going back telling stories, and we get all the Les Grossman stuff, like all the women he's married and divorced.
Oh my God, that would be hilarious. I love that idea.
Oh man, when that writer strike ends, I might just try and pitch it.
The Les Grossman story. I mean, it would be, that could be, because they've talked about it. They've talked about doing a Les Grossman, and I know that Tom Cruise loved playing that part, and he was so good as Les Grossman.
Yes, he was.
He was
I think
so
he was
good.
Channeling a lot of people that he was upset with.
It was great.
That was great. Well, you have been very gracious with your time today, Robert.
This has been fun, man.
I love talking with you about these things. I love the fact that we were able to actually dive in onto this subject and really explore how it works, because it really just comes down to doing the work with the characters and the premise, and also having fun with it. And that was the other part too. In contrast, like Mission Impossible 1, very, very fun movie. not just with the set pieces, but the buildups to it, and the
Oh
little
yeah.
bit of stuff, even the sleight of hand stuff that Tom Cruise spent months learning, because that's all in camera. There's no optical effects in that.
No, no.
And it just shows how, and you don't get that so much. And I think it's fair to say that the revelation I've had with this conversation is that you can take this model of kind of like a deconstruction of your hero, but if you don't have fun with it, and you're doing it authentically to kind of service the story, service the characters for the sake of the story, not at the expense of the story, you probably have a better shot of winning over your audience with this approach, as opposed to what we've seen so far in some other franchises, whether it be film or television. So I want to thank you so much for the time that
Oh,
you've.
this is great. I mean, I love these conversations that we have.
Yeah, I like it too, because it's also showcasing our love for this art that is. I think we're due for a renaissance pretty soon. I think it's around the corner. We'll see what happens.
I look, I do too. I think that, Lucas and Spielberg both predicted that it was like 10 years ago that there's going to be a lot of big budget movies that fail. It's ironic that one of those big budget movies is an Indiana Jones movie, but then there will be a contraction in the industry, and it might open up a new golden age of auteurs, writer directors. I just don't think that there's as many auteurs today as there were back then, because now there's people have different agendas, and there's obviously a lot of politicking that's going on now, where people are putting their politics and their messages in front of their characters and their stories, which I think is hampering our storytelling. And I think that, what people mistake for, whether it's gatekeeping or some people call a lot of other people's objections to bad storytelling, whether it's bigotry, or it's weird. And I think that ultimately that what people want, and what a lot of me as an angry Star Trek YouTuber, what I want are great stories well told. That's all I've ever wanted, because great storytelling is how we convey meaning. It's the easiest, quickest way to convey meaning from one person to another. We're always telling stories in our personal lives. We're always conveying through retelling an event. Oh my God, what happened? You're never going to believe what happened yesterday. Mm-hmm. And we tell stories all the time. And when our great stories, and the stories of great movies and great TV, when they're not genuine anymore, like we talked about fraudulent creation, we have a lot of fraudulent storytellers telling fraudulent tales. And we know if the tales are fraudulent. You don't need to put some kind of a Geiger counter on a story to tell whether or not it works or not. You feel it as an audience member. And, there's people like a lot of different kinds of movies, but there's a reason why there's an AFI 100 best movies of all time list. You might not agree with them all because your taste is different, but there's a reason why so many of these movies are considered the greatest movies in the world by people all over the world. There is a consensus that Jaws is a great movie, that Citizen Kane is a great movie, that The Wizard of Oz is a great movie. There's consensus there because they are great movies. Now, whether or not you in particular feel that's the case, I understand that maybe your personal taste is different, but the fact is, the world history has shown us what movies are great. And history's not wrong.
It's not wrong. And I think it also goes into the fact that the modern day reference material that the younger writers are digesting is reestablishing what the bar is, when this is not the bar. This is actually lower than the bar. I've been drilled in my head for years that just because this is the success in theaters now doesn't mean it's the success in the pantheon of film. It's right. Like you got to compete with who you think is the best out there, because other people are probably going to judge you against them. And what I kind of see is that they're not competing with what the best is out there. They're competing what's the best in the moment, or what's something that they know is pretty low on the output side of things, on quality. And I think that's where we're having this weird cycle, is that we don't have enough people excited about the things that were really, really great. We don't have enough people putting in value to the stuff that was successful, and challenging people as to ask why it's successful. And we've lost one of the most valuable traits, or at least it's been heavily diminished, which is curiosity. Nobody's curious about other things or other people anymore. It's self showmanship. Everybody wants to be their own ringmaster.
Yep.
And that that's pretty sad. And I
No,
don't really want to leave this on a dour note, but it is pretty sad. But I think if the Renaissance is going to happen, it's going to be, I think, oddly enough, I think streaming might be able to do that, because if you're going into the backlog of like, oh, I hate everything that's coming out now, maybe I'll take a look. What came out 10 years ago? What came out 15 years ago?
right.
And maybe they'll discover that, and it might reinvigorate the industry when they see, oh, this is what they mean when they talk about a character conflict and making tough decisions. And what a strong character is not someone with muscles, but someone who's caught between a rock and a hard place. And they have to either make the best decision for them or the worst decision for them, but it's the right decision. And that's where the drama, that's the dilemma, that's where our engagement comes from.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And look, great stories never go out of style. Great stories well told. And there's still magic in great shows and great movies, and we still define ourselves through them. And eventually people are going to be, we will have looked at each other for so long. We're going to want to go back to those great stories, because we realize that, watching people on TikTok and watching people on YouTube and all that, it only goes so far. And eventually humanity is always going to come back to storytelling. I mean, I'll tell you, I'd seen a clip from Ridley Scott's Napoleon when I was at CinemaCon in April. Seeing that trailer today, I'm like, count me in. Historical epic. I'm excited. Looks good. It looked really good. They showed us this battle sequence on the ice at CinemaCon.
Oh, over the lake. Yes. The famous Napoleon.
Yeah, incredible. That sequence in the movie is astonishing. It's astonishing. And I don't know how they did it, but it was done incredibly well. And I was just on the edge of my seat, my anus clenched up like,
well,
it was.
I saw the trailer this morning and I loved it visually, but it has this one thing, and I don't understand what it is with Hollywood.
The music.
No, they're all French characters, but they speak with a British accent.
I know. or Joaquin Phoenix is like just talking American English.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it throws me off.
I know. It's a weird, it's like watching Valkyrie and all the British actors are speaking with a British accent.
Yeah. All the German characters are with British accents.
It's such a weird, it is bizarre. I mean, I understand with the actors, and I just don't understand why not make a Napoleon movie like this? Just make it in French.
Like the Three Musketeers two-parter that
I can't wait.
I am so excited for that because it looks epic. But at the same time, it looks disciplined too.
Yes, but I think Napoleon looks great to me. I mean, and it's funny because when they said from the director of, they used all of his best movies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, they know what's up.
Yeah, no, I think they bet. Listen, if there's one person who can do some very great visuals and cut them together expertly, it's Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
Tony Scott was the guy who could just get you like really engaged with those characters and really into their plight. And it's a shame that he's gone, because part of me always wondered, like, I would love to see those two just work together in a very new, like, just see how they could do it. Like, how could the brothers come together and really just knock something out of the park, right?
Yeah.
And no, sadly, we won't get that. But that, I just imagine in my own fantasy world, there's a timeline out there where those two are like working on something that we've never heard of before, and it's going to like revolutionize or change the way we looked at movies or cinema, just because they had all those years behind them. We're like, this is what we learned, this is what we think we can do. We're pulling it off. We're making our version of Metropolis. Just break the
although we're getting Megalopolis from Coppola, and we're getting who I never would have thought I'd ever see a Gladiator 2 from Ridley Scott, but here we are.
I remember the pitch of the original Gladiator 2, the
Nick Cave version.
Yeah.
When he wakes up in Olympus.
Yeah.
I'll send you back. I actually I wanted to see that. I wanted to see Ridley Scott's Olympus and who are going to play the gods, like in Clash of the Titans. Laurence Olivier, Zeus.
Yeah.
Who's going to play Zeus?
Oh, probably been
or
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah,
yeah, of course.
as why not? Oh boy. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rob.
Yeah, this was great.
For everyone listening, where can they find you, sir?
Oh, well, you can find me on my YouTube channel, The Burnett Work, where we're doing a lot of cool stuff over there. And then, I'm working on some projects now that some will reach fruition sooner rather than later, but there's some cool stuff going on. You can see me actually the next in July on Saturdays at 8 o'clock. You can see me on a documentary called 1982, The Greatest Geek Year Ever. And if you don't have the CW, you can get the app. You can download it for free. Maybe not in Canada, but if you download it, you can watch the documentary. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of really great people in that documentary talking about why 1982 was the greatest geek year ever in cinema, with movies like Blade Runner and The Thing opening on the same day, and Poltergeist and Star Trek 2 opening on the same day. What do you go see first?
Yeah.
So it's good stuff.
That sounds awesome. So thank you again for this. For all of those out there listening, thanks so much for hanging out with us. And we'll be doing more of these in the future. So in the
Yes.
meantime, when it comes to great stories, never forget it all starts with the script.